Good evening and welcome tonight to this very interesting talk on the power of strategy and diplomacy, opportunities and challenges in a time, in a world new order for Europe. My name is Alessandra Franzi. I'm actually a student of the London School of Economics in International Relations and Diplomacy. And tonight we are joined by very distinguished guests, three politicians who have been in politics for a very long time, and they can bring a different view on the matters that Europe has to face. We have Mr. Luigi Marattin, who is an associate professor of political economy at the University of Bologna. He had a long political career of over 30 years. From 2014 to 2018, he served at Palazzo Chigi as economic advisor to the Prime Minister Matteo Renzi, and from 2016 to 2018, he chaired the Technical Commission on Standards Requirement, which initiated the process of overcoming historical spending in municipalities. Since 2018, he has been a member of the Chamber of Deputies, and from 2020 to 2022, he chaired the Finance Committee of the Chamber of Deputies. He was re-elected in 2022 with a Terzo Polo. He left the party Italia Viva and put together four associations. We created the Partito Liberaldemocratico, and since June 28, 2025, he is the party leader. Welcome to the LSE. Sir Robert Nail, he had a very long political career in the Conservative parties. He served variously as Minister for Local Government and Planning, Vice Chair of the Conservative Party, Chair of the Justice Select Committee. He was also a member of the National Security Strategy Scrutiny Committee. From 2012 to 2015, he was a member of the UK delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, serving on the Legal Affairs and Human Rights Committee and the Committee on the Election of Judges to the European Court of Human Rights. He was Parliamentary Assembly's representative on GRECO, the Council of Europe's overarching anti-corruption body. He has an honor degree from the London School of Economics in law, qualified as a barrister. He has been appointed a Master of Bench of the Middle Temple and King's Counsel for his service to the justice system. He was knighted for political and public service in 2020. He is also a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. He is a non-executive director of the leading firm of accountants in the City of London, a member of the Council of Justice, the well-known legal charity, and a member of the Conservative European Forum. He regularly writes and broadcasts on legal and political topics. Thank you for being with us tonight. And Mr. Brando Benifei, he's an Italian MEP serving his third term in the European Parliament. During his previous mandate, he was the co-rapporteur for the Artificial Intelligence Act. And thanks to this work, in March 2024, he won the prize for the best MEP on the mandate assigned by the Parliament magazine. Now he is the coordinator in the Committee of International Trade for the Socialists and Democrats Group and chair of the European Parliament's US delegation. He is a member of the Committee of Constitutional Affairs, and he works also as a substitute member on the EU internal market and consumer protection on the legal affairs, always following closely digital issues. Unfortunately, we had a fourth guest that wasn't well tonight and couldn't join us, Mr. Pototti, but we want to dive in into these very interesting talks with three amazing aspects: strategy, diplomacy, and the new world order. So I want to start with Mr. Benifei, since he's from Brussels and he doesn't have much time, but I want to firstly ask you about your take and your view on the biggest challenges for Europe on the technological and innovation topic, especially compared, where Europe stands compared to US and the big investment of the big tech companies with the Trump administration.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this opportunity. I want to thank you and Luigi and all the organization behind this debate. And I want to give my greetings to the other speakers, in fact, Luigi Marattin and our other guests from the Conservative Party. I think it's interesting to compare different views and approaches, and also different institutions that are involved on these topics. In fact, I'm sorry, I cannot stay very much because we are having a quite heated discussion that I need to go back to because it will continue, unfortunately, because we haven't solved some internal discussions that, however, we need to get through to affirm a position of the European Parliament on a very well-known topic that in fact I hear a lot also when I go to US. When I go to Washington, often they ask me about the Draghi report. And so this topic is in the mouths of everyone. And in fact, I think we could start from that by saying that I think overall the Draghi report has indicated some very important challenges for relaunching European competitiveness. And it has proposed a package that of measures that entails different areas where we can imagine simplification, but also more political cohesion and more ambitious initiatives. I have to say that for my political sensitivity, maybe not everything that is in that report appears so immediately sexy. But I think that with everyone's sensitivity being in place, that will probably bring us to bring some interpretation to that report indications. I can broadly say that I think it's a good way forward, because I give you one example on a very contentious topic around the Draghi report, that is the simplification agenda. I say that because, as you mentioned, I work a lot on the transatlantic relations, and we get a lot of push from our transatlantic ally on simplifying EU legislation, but also from different sides. And we heard that we should simplify our rules also in the digital sphere. I was myself, as you said, rapporteur of the EU AI Act. Today I met with 15 high-level congressional staffers that came to visit the European Parliament from the US House and Senate, and we discussed a lot about the different perspectives around AI regulation. Although in US there is some growing interest in doing that at the moment, despite the general political climate that you can see in the country. But I'm referring to that because simplification will also entail this kind of regulations, like data protection, Digital Services Act, AI Act, etc. So I tell you, I do not refuse the challenge of simplification. I think that's an important challenge for competitiveness of the EU, but we must intend where is the priority of simplification. Personally, I think that a big priority that is not liked by the member states of the EU, and they should be challenged on that, is the coherence of the enforcement. We have too much fragmentation of legislation that is in theory at EU level. It's made for the big EU market, our strength being one big market, also compared to other parts of the world. But the implementation of the legislation is often contradictory due to the lack of a proper centralized governance and enforcement. And this is linked to the lack of willingness from the member states to actually give more power to common agencies to actually govern the implementation of rules. This would simplify, together with the 28 regime that we are discussing. So a new regime, a kind of extra regime, not substituting, but additional to the national regimes, to incorporate business in Europe. And so this, I come back from a trip to the Silicon Valley a few months ago, where there was a lot of interest on that, because it could help bringing more business back to Europe. So I'm giving these examples to say that maybe personally, as a staunch European federalist, I would be more fascinated immediately by the clear indication of Draghi to head towards more majority voting, overcoming veto powers, and making EU more similar. I mean, only a few steps in that direction, maybe, but for sure more similar to a federal union rather than a confederal structure. He was very clear on this point a few days ago when he spoke in a Brussels conference marking 1 year of the Draghi report. So, as I said, I might be closer to that as a crucial point, but I think we need to tackle all the aspects of that report. It's giving us an interesting, maybe not really fully complete, but quite compelling set of actions to build more European competitiveness, also looking at the innovations side. And on this point, and I want to go towards the end of my intervention by saying that it's not only about, again, simplification of regulation, it's not only about changes of institutional structure and making you able to decide faster and in a more stable way, but it's also, again, in the Draghi report, the way we organize our resources and where we get them. So he proposes, and I think is right to do so, to again reproduce the experiment of the common indebting with the what we have done before. So to create a larger European budget. Now the European common budget is 1% of the GDP. It's quite small compared to the number of priorities that have grown in time by the European Union. And we have seen also the proposal for new European-wide own resources, so to get some revenue for the EU budget. So I am saying that because I am working on not only on the regulation of the AI, on which I have been working as rapporteur for the AI Act, but also now I'm following the implementation of the AI Act with a working group of the Parliament, but also I'm working on the, we can say, initiative for more EU competitiveness on the AI ecosystem. So AI factories by the European Commission, the AI gigafactories that involve the private sector in a very direct way, different initiatives. However, the resources that are mobilized both from the public side and the private side are incomparably low compared to what we see in US, but also in China. There are many factors for that. It's also the lack of reforms that the EU should have done already, but also some structural elements that we can say are even broader, like the lack of integration of the financial markets, for sure, but also the lack of political will to invest in our technological sovereignty and our capacity to compete on this. To be honest, this is one of the elements. Our weakness on the technological side, together with the lack of a proper European defense, that, as Draghi said, again, a few days ago in the conference here in Brussels, these elements led us to be weaker in the negotiation on the trade deal with the US, on which I worked on as I said earlier, and it was said presenting me. So it's a fact that the EU today is still politically weak and economically is still burdened by different obstacles. Obviously, I am a social democrat in the European sense, and I believe that we should not reduce our welfare system. We should try to update it, but I defend some elements of our social protections that maybe Draghi could be considered saying that they should be overcome, that they are complicating our labor market. We could have a long discussion about this, but I think that overall, with some, again, maybe interpretation and sensitivities, this Draghi report can be a very important indication of where the EU should go if we want to regain competitiveness in the digital area. Although I think that really it needs to be understood in its complexity, because otherwise we insist only on some simplification or delaying of some legislation without looking at the bigger picture, but it can be also the other way around. So to conclude, I want to say that this is very important, I think, for EU to play a role also in the relation with its allies in the transatlantic context, but also with the UK, as we are talking in UK. I'm connected from Brussels, but the debate is taking place in UK. I have to say, having worked as a rapporteur for my political group on the new trade relations with UK, I've been to London sometimes. I will be back soon to discuss the trade agreements that we have in place and the cooperation in general. I have to say that UK, in my view, unfortunately, has left the EU. I would have preferred them to stay, but it's now a very important interlocutor for many initiatives, including initiatives on the technological side. We are working, our institutions are doing that. But I think that if we want to really excel on technology, we need to do a series of things, but also believe on that from the political leader side, which I think are still not fully focused on this very important issue for European future. And a lot can be, again, taken from the Draghi report, at least to start working in this direction. So I hope I gave a few food for thoughts that can help the discussion. And I thank you again for inviting me and letting me bring my point of view on the subject from the European institutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we all remember this dinner that we saw in Washington with Trump and all the big tech, and everyone was asked how many hundreds of millions we're going to invest, and I think it's something like a couple of trillions in the next 2-3 years. So I want to ask to Mr. Marattin, what's your take on this, on innovation? Because it's on one side we have the US that is, trying to create a stronger economy through a very unusual leader, at least an attitude, a very different, strong attitude. But for European citizens, for young students who want to start to build their life, and there is this situation that in Europe is not Europe yet, and doesn't, all the regulations in place, doesn't give a lot of room.
Okay, first of all, let me thank you, Alessandra, for organizing this wonderful debate. Let me thank LSC for hosting us, Sir Robert Neal for sharing the stage with me, Brando from Brussels, and all of you who came here tonight. Well, while Brando was speaking, I was thinking that, I'm always very cautious when people talk about the Draghi report, because I was there when Draghi was kicked out of Italian government. I mean, Draghi is the person that everyone applauds, but no one really wants. Or better, no one really wants to follow what Draghi is saying. So Draghi is becoming some kind of mythological thing. You mention Draghi, everyone stands up. We always quote Draghi and what Draghi is suggesting as the best solution for everything, and then no one wants to follow what he's saying. Let me give you an example, also answering, of course, Alessandra's question. The problem in Europe is very clear. If Europe wants to be on the global stage for the next 50 years or next centuries, obviously he must take on the competition of US, China, very soon India, and probably also someone else. Europe has the power and ability to do that, but only if it does one thing, which obviously is the core of the Draghi report. Member states need to be willing to give out national sovereignty in order to build a shared sovereignty. That's it. And the truth, the hard truth, is that no one wants to do it. Let me give you an example. European Union financial markets, they are nothing to envy to US financial markets, taken as a whole. But the fragmentation that Brando Benifei was mentioning means that we do not have a unified capital market in Europe. We have 27 segmented markets, 27 different set of rules, 27 different authorities, and countries are very jealous of those things, and they do not want to give them up. They quote Draghi, they say we need more Europe to compete to US, but they're not even thinking about giving up national sovereignty on those things. Look at what Germany did when an Italian bank tried to buy Unicredit, tried to buy Commerzbank. You cannot do that. You are from another country. My government is applying the golden powers, which obviously, as you know, is something that we created to protect our military industries from China. We use that to prevent two Italian banks from merging. Two Italian banks from merging. Because Milan and Rome, they fight not over in football, but also in economic power. But following Draghi means that you in Italy should look at Helsinki or Paris or Madrid and say, this is just another region of a country. And we're not able to do that within one country. We changed the name of this. It has been called for many years Capital Market Union. Now it's called Saving and Investment Unions. It only means one thing. National states should give up sovereignty on the regulation of internal financial market in order to create a unified capital market with one set of rules, one authority. And I could go on forever. The 1% budget that Brando was mentioning, you cannot enlarge it by having more taxes, at least not according to my political view. Okay? So the only way you can do it is the national states can have to give up portions of national public spending and devolve it to a EU budget, which means that there are some topics that shouldn't be covered anymore at the national level, but they should be covered at the union level. And countries do not want to do that. But they keep quoting Draghi, and Draghi receives as the best thing that can happen to human lives. I told you, I was there when he was kicked out of Italian government for saying these things. Obviously by some political parties, which are the same, they say, look, well, Draghi is beautiful, beautiful man. So there is a lot of, confusion on these things. And I understand that, politically speaking, it's very hard for member states politicians to address their own people and say, look, we need to give out national sovereignty. Because what's happening in Europe today, in this country, in France, in Germany, in Italy, is that people they show they want different things. They want to go back to national states. And the biggest challenge for politicians in this era, these times, is to explain people that with national states, with the national levels, you cannot keep up the competition in the global world. Obviously, the problem is that when you say these things, you say, why should I give up my national sovereignty to an obscure entity as the European Union. The European Union is not a federal state. I'm sure you are familiar with the no taxation without representation. If you look at the architecture of the European Union, it doesn't look at all as a structure who can today be up to that challenge. European Parliament is not a parliament. European Commission is not a government. We don't elect the president of the European Commission. We don't have European parties. We have 27 different electoral laws to elect a parliament, which is not a parliament. We have the unanimity decision rule, which is obviously is nothing, this is not a governance to be in the modern world. I mean, the latest things with the individual sanctions against those two Israeli government members, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. Von der Leyen proposed sanctions. Everyone is talking about, yeah, I agree, I don't agree. We are talking about nothing because there is a unanimity rule there. And Viktor Orban already said that he's not willing even to discuss that. And for foreign policy as well, this unanimity rules. How the hell can we be a player in the global world if we had 27 members which have to agree on single issues? So, Alessandro, to answer your questions, well, I really believe that the biggest challenge for us is people are scared of globalization. People are scared of giving out national sovereignty. People are nostalgic of when times were better, in their opinions. In my country, people are nostalgic when the public debt rose from 60% of GDP to 125 in 13 years. I bet they are. They were eating at a very expensive restaurant without paying the bills. We are paying the bills. That's an Italian issue. So the thing is, the challenge is to explain British people, French people, German people, the Italian people that the globalization is not something you go back from. And in order to address globalization, you need to build a serious institutions at the European level, not a super state, but you need to delegate to the European Union those things that cannot be managed at the national level anymore. Are you seriously looking me in the eye and saying that immigration can be managed at the national level? Are you seriously looking me in the eye and saying that capital markets in the globalized world can be managed at the national level? Are you seriously looking at me and saying that defense in these times has to be managed at the national level? In order to do that, we need to build an institutional architecture which is able to support this process, and we need to be able to explain that to people. Because if we go to the globalized world with Netherlands, Italy, Spain, Germany fighting with each other, and with US and China and India, the future of this continent is dark. But we need to do a much better job in explaining that. Outside university rooms, outside parliaments, we need to go to the people and explain that in the globalized world, we need a different speed, a different way of thinking, because that's the only way we can be a global player in a globalized world. Our enemies, those who are refusing those things, they are a very easy task. Say, look, globalized elites, they are taking on your life, which is a powerful narrative, as we are seeing. But they're wrong. And we need to be able to do a better job in explaining why they're wrong and how can we offer a different perspective which retains the value of democracy. Because whatever happens, we can't afford to delegate those things to technocratic elites. We cannot afford to lose the accountability of the decisions. even these kind of decisions to our people and to our voters. It's the most difficult task that a generation of politicians have ever faced. But if we don't face it, well, this time, considering also the international situation, considering the threat we have from Russia, and from our enemies of liberal democratic societies, let me tell you that if you fail to face the challenge, for the first time since I've been into politics, and it's been 30 years, I will be very, very, very worried. And I don't like to be worried. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marattin. I want to ask to Sir Neil, what's your take on this? Because obviously UK left the European Union. European Union seems struggling on several fronts, with challenges of, at least to find a common voice on the most pressing issues. But we saw the recent visit of Trump here, and the state visit, and probably there have been agreements and between the two governments, financial arrangements. What is your view about UK and the opportunities as a new, for instance, artificial intelligence hub? And how can UK relate to Europe with this task?
Okay, Alessandra. Well, thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. It's always nice to come back to my old alma mater. It's been changed rather a lot and improved rather a lot in terms of the facilities since I was here longer ago than I like to remember. But it's always good to be back at LSE. Of course, LSE's international connections always been one of its great selling points. And actually, that's something where I think that commonality that we have throughout in Bologna, in some of Italy's leading universities, the other great international university of the world, I think is an important part of that soft power that we were talking about when we talk about strategy and diplomacy. Actually, those connections, those personal roots and shared experiences are important, and we should never underestimate them. And that's why I very much hope, for example, now that Britain's left the EU, we will see a deal done which enables us to get back closer to something like Erasmus, for example, where British students were studying in Europe much more freely, and European students studying over here much more freely too. I actually think that is very much in both sides' interests, because at the end of the day, very much to my regret, Britain left the European Union. I campaigned to remain in the European Union, and there's always been a strong one nation, we call it, a pretty liberal and internationalist element within the Conservative Party. You might not think it now. It may not be in the ascendancy, perhaps, in my party at the moment, but it's worth remembering that, after all, the single market was the creation of a Conservative Prime Minister, driven predominantly by Margaret Thatcher, who took others with her on that. Lord Caulfield, a British lawyer, politician, was the commissioner, and actually did the hard yards in making that come about. So people like Jason Trugham, my very good friend Jason Trugham in KC, King's Council, who's in the audience, and I have always adhered to that one nation tradition, which would regard itself as being, I think, liberal and free market in terms of economics, and socially progressive, but as is often the way, you can't do the same read across in terms of political parties between different countries. So I suspect many of the things that Luigi, you've been saying, would find sympathy with many of my Conservative colleagues, though certainly not all of them. One of the problems, of course, is because of our electoral system, we have to have large parties which are coalitions within themselves. You have a sort of an honest coalition where you form coalitions between different parties. Ours is perhaps a slightly less honest one, where we all have to pretend we're in the same party, although there's a considerable range of opinion within it. Whether or not that will succeed for the future, I don't know, because there are a lot of pressures in the British political system towards fragmentation, and that, I think, reflects pressures in British society as a whole. So I'm sorry we're on the outside, but there's still a lot of common issues, and although Europe has its challenges, certainly the United Kingdom has its challenges as well, and I don't think we're necessarily doing any better in tackling some of those. But what I thought I'd do is just step back from that and actually look about why it's important that we continue to cooperate, even though regrettably we're not in the same institutional structure of the EU, and why that's important both on a bilateral level between Britain and Italy, and then with Britain and the EU, and then the broader institutions. Because, as I see the potential threats that we face, there is undoubtedly the one that our colleague in Brussels mentioned about competitiveness. No question of that. That's an international competitiveness issue. One of our real problems has been that both the UK and the EU have struggled with productivity levels. We don't match the productivity levels of our rivals, either in the United States or in Asia. Now, that's something that we need to deal with. That's not sustainable. That's why we have been living in a restaurant without being able to afford to pay the bills for so long. That's made worse, I suggest, going forward in both the EU, certainly Italy and the UK, with an aging population. That actually means that we have low productivity and a diminishing percentage of the workforce of working and therefore productive age. That creates in turn both pressures for those who are demanding support from the state perfectly properly, and fewer within the economy who are actually able to do the wealth creation that we need for that. That's where AI is important, and we do have to embrace AI. We have to embrace innovation, because I see no other means by which we, if I take broader Europe, EU plus the non-EU members who are also signed up to Western liberal values, themselves, Norway, Ireland, and so on, we've got to embrace technology and innovation to compensate for our lack of size in terms of population, because we're sitting between two massively larger economic blocks. It seems to me more and more we are seeing an alignment between China and Russia. China is clearly going to be the dominant partner in that. I think the way things are progressing, and it seems to be Xi Jinping's objective almost, that Russia is sucked into being a junior partner in a geostrategic relationship with China. China ultimately has the resource. If there's going to be any challenge in that part of the world to China, it's not going to come from Russia, it's going to come from India. It's India that has the dynamic economic growth and the population potential to be a challenge. Won't be Japan either, because Japan struggles with many of the same problems that we have in Europe. Now that presents real dangers. It also presents dangers when President Trump is taking America clearly away from an internationalist position, is not sympathetic to his traditional allies, and I don't think we can assume, much though we might like it, that Trump is a flash in the pan. The way the MAGA ideology has captured the Republican Party leaves the real risk that there may yet be perhaps a marginally less bombastic, a less eccentric Trump come along, but you can't guarantee that there won't be someone wedded to a similar ideology, which will be essentially inward-looking, an isolationist, protectionist, and that isn't good news for Europe, be it the EU or the UK. So I think that's a real issue that we have got to take on board and adjust to that reality. That means in the defence sphere, the risk is that Trump's attempt to woo Russia away from China, not I think one that's likely to succeed, nonetheless emboldens Russia to be more and more aggressive towards its neighbours. We're seeing that, of course, in Ukraine, and both the UK and Italy, as NATO members, have an important role in trying to shore up any democracy that's under threat, even if it's not a NATO member. Because we all know that if Putin had his way in Russia, I wouldn't want to be very comfortable in the Baltic states, to which both the UK and Italy have treaty obligations to Article 5 obligations, exactly right. And you've got to stand by those if you mean it. So that's why it's important that we don't let Putin succeed. But the danger is Trump being, I think, so obsessed with the Chinese threat that he is, in fact, in attempting to see what he sees as America's interest, which is broadly Pacific-facing now, he emboldens what is a military threat rather than an economic threat to Europe. Russia's a weakish economy, but it is still a real physical danger to us, both in terms of hard military warfare potential and, of course, also in its efforts to destabilize economies and society as well. So that's the major threat, and that's a threat to all of us. It's a threat to all the Western democracies in the EU and Europe as a whole. That's something where we do need to find better architecture to collaborate, even though Britain has left, and to suck in people like the Republic of Ireland. It may be small, but it has a very good track record in, for example, peacekeeping through the UN, and it's part of the liberal democratic world. That's true of Norway, of course, as well, which has important strategic reserves of oil and energy, and is an important strategic position in that coast of the North Atlantic. So we need to pull those people together. We've got to think hard about how we can do that. Although I'm not a supporter of the current government, I'm not a member of the Labour Party, obviously, I actually wish Keir Starmer well in trying to repair relations with the European Union. I don't think my party made a very good fist of Brexit. I don't think there ever was a good fist to be made of Brexit, personally. But I think my own side, one of the reasons maybe we lost the election was because we mucked that up. But let's try, therefore, to restore those relations in a constructive way. But we can't realistically think that we can reverse Brexit anytime soon, however much one might personally like that. And that's because there are some other challenges that we all face that we've got to grapple. So there's that external threat where we need to work together and improve our cooperation. There is the threat of I think, disenchantment by our societies, by people. Many ordinary people would say, what has liberal capitalism, liberal democracy done for me? That's seen by pressures on the cost of living, concern for us, and we potentially have the highest inflation coming up this year in the G7. In the UK, issues like housing. Housing is really particularly important to the British psyche. The ability to own your own home has been one of the great aspirations of British people. That increasingly is harder and harder for young people in this country. At the same time, the very opportunities that we see with AI potentially take out some of the lower paid jobs too. That's why you've seen the rise of populist parties like Reform. That is fueled, of course, by the difficulties we're having in controlling migration. Now, I know Italy's on the front line and doing a stalwart job in humanitarian and security terms, and I salute what's being done by the Italian naval forces and Coast Guard forces in dealing with this humanitarian crisis. But of course, having got into the European Union, into Schengen, then inevitably the British are now learning to their cost that leaving the European Union wasn't the means, there was no means of guaranteeing they could safeguard their borders either. And the same issue washes up on our shores too. That drives disillusionment, that drives the rise of nationalist populism, which is, I think, a very real threat to us all. And we, I agree, have to make the case, the rhetorical case for the advantages of liberal democracy, the moral case for the advantages of liberal democracy. But it's also important that we deliver on some of those real tangible areas of concern to our populations. So in our case, we do have to deal with their concern that you can't get a house for your kids, that you may be waiting into your 40s until you can do that. We do have to deal with the concern that those who cheat the migration system are in effect undermining the genuine migrant, the welcome economic migrant, those who do add value, the genuine asylum seeker. And I think that does mean that we're going to have to revisit some of our international rules and conventions around migration and refugees, which were admirable when they were set up in the post-war world, but I think are perhaps no longer able to work and operate as effectively in the new age of mass transcontinental migration, which wasn't envisaged when we signed the Refugee Convention, for example, in 1951, or very importantly, when the UK and Italy signed up to the European Convention on Human Rights, which, as you mentioned, Alexandra, is something I've very much involved with throughout my political career. I desperately do not want Britain to leave the European Convention on Human Rights, and that may be an area where my party and I have a parting of the ways if they persist in their current policies. But I do think all of us who do not want that to happen need to think hard about some reform that may be necessary to the way some of those rights operate in practice now. If you want to preserve the institution, as I do, as with anything, A liberal and a moderate conservatives will both say you have to be prepared to reform institutions as well when they no longer act and operate in the best interest of the people that they are designed to serve. And that's the final thing I was going to say, Alexander, is the other threat we have through the rise of populism is the threat to institutions. The undermining of respect for institutions of all kinds. It could be social institutions, it could be cultural institutions, but above all political and democratic institutions. And that again is fueled by extremism from outside. And that can be extremism of left or right, it can be extremism of right-wing nationalism, it can be the extremism that comes as well from more traditional Middle Eastern terrorism, from Tehran and their proxies and so on. All of those people are seeking to undermine institutions, and I'm afraid we know that the Chinese have a long history of seeking to undermine institutions as well. We have to work with China, got to have a relationship with them, and there are opportunities that can be made there, but we've got to have our eyes very open as to what the agenda in Beijing is, and that there's a willingness to use subterfuge, economic sabotage and other matters when necessary. We have to be alert to that. All of that means much closer European cooperation. It means perhaps Europe, as well as cooperating amongst itself, then also needs to make sure that we build our alliances with like-minded people outside. So cooperating with Canada, New Zealand, Australia, trying to make sure that India does not go down too populist a course, and that's a risk. Seeing what we can do with the emerging markets in other parts of Southeast Asia, in Latin America, which we don't talk about very much, but with the rise of Brazil and others, the real economic opportunities there, the shift in the geopolitical focus towards that southern end is important too. So those are some real challenges. That requires us having a clear strategy to deal with those, and a strategy where we work together to align those strategies between us. And also, that's going to need diplomacy, both of a hard kind and a soft kind, more than ever before. So that's my take on where we are.
Thank you, thank you. And in fact, this was my next question about diplomacy in a time of very complicated geopolitical issues like the wars, for instance, in Ukraine, with Putin and threat that is there for not only Ukraine's survival, but for all Europe, and with the war in the Middle East as well, with the situation. What is really the role that diplomacy can play? I think because a lot of citizens, whether here or in Europe, they expect politicians to try to sort out matters in a way that is most effective and efficient, and all countries accountable also for their actions. So, in this light, what is your view? Both of you, and then if the audience wants to question, I will pass the mic.
Well, I'm sorry to begin my little speech the same way I began the first one, but I'm very puzzled as well when I think about what Alessandra was saying. Because what Europe is doing is basically saying, in face of international crisis, whether it's the war in Ukraine, whether it's Middle East or anything else, Europe is saying something and then is wondering, why is anybody listening to us? Look how beautiful we are. We come from the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans. We have the culture. We speak so nicely, but why is anybody listening to us? Well, ever since the Stone Age, or a couple of thousands of years, your voice is heard in the world at three conditions. If you are strong economically, if you are strong in innovation, and if you are strong militarily. Otherwise, people don't care about what you say, because this is the world we're living in, and this is the world we always lived in. Militarily, economically, and technology. Is Europe strong economically? Well, it can be if we do what we were discussing earlier. If we put together our markets, we can be strong economically. If we give out national sovereignty in order to build a shared sovereignty with an adequate institutional support. Is Europe strong in technology? Well, I'm sorry, Brando is not here anymore, but I have some doubts that the EU regulation of artificial intelligence is the best way to make Europe great again. Or to make Europe great for the first time. Maybe. Because people who want to innovate don't come to Europe. Well, it's not so much. What people who want to innovate don't come to small markets. They need big markets. And then I don't want to resort to what was that? US innovates, China imitates, EU regulates. Maybe it's a slogan. Well, but it's not so much. Is Europe strong militarily? Well, if there are some students of economics here, you know that defense is a public good. Public good means that it's not rival, not excludable, which means that public good has to be provided by the state, because no private has an incentive to, no private operator has an incentive to sell something which you cannot exclude anyone from the consumption. Defense, justice are public goods. Public goods doesn't mean public good doesn't mean that it's free. It means that it has to be provided by a local or national or supranational government. Defense is a public good. The problem is that in Europe, this public good for the last 80 years has been provided by someone else. Has been provided and paid for by someone else. And we were under the impression that it was free, just because we weren't paying for it. Now this someone else said, look, enough. I don't know whether he's going to be there for, well, he's not going to be there for more than 3 years, but I'm not sure what's going to happen after Trump. It might get worse. Anyway, it seems that this decision is now a pillar of American policy. We are done with paying for Europe's security. Also because they are saying that there is no threat from Russia. Vice President says in Munich that the threat for democracy doesn't come from Russia, it comes from the fact that in the EU we don't let anyone speak their mind. So we have to provide that public good ourselves. So all this debate about the rearm, readiness, whatever you want to call it, that's the right way, I think, to put it. We need to provide public good defense to ourselves. And if you sum up national military spending in Europe, member states military spending, we are fine. But there's too much fragmentations, 22 sets, different kinds of tanks, 21, 22. We need to integrate the military industrial sectors. If we don't do that, we might scream as much as we want on Middle East. And my opinion on Middle East is very different from the Mrs. von der Leyen. I think that until Hamas is not out of the picture, there won't be any peace in Middle East. There won't be any peace in the Middle East until Hamas is taken out of the equation, which, by the way, were the words of the Arab League last month, not actually the international Zionist. But we can scream as much as we want. If Europe is not strong militarily, if Europe is not strong economically, and you were very right in saying, recalling the different levels of productivity growth in Europe. But again, in order productivity to grow, we need larger markets. In order for innovation to grow, we need venture capital, which in turn needs larger markets. And if Europe is not strong in innovation, there won't be any role for diplomacy. they're not in contradiction, military power and democracy, because military power is the deterrent. I don't remember, I wanted to look it up, but I forgot. A couple of months ago, UK and France made a statement from a military base in UK, I don't remember the name, which no one noticed outside England, I guess, but it was crucial. Because UK and France are the only nuclear powers in the continent. And they said, look, we put our nuclear weapons at the disposal of protecting Europe against foreign threats. Because nuclear powers, why do you think India and Pakistan stopped fighting after a few hours? Because of nuclear deterrence. France and UK are the only nuclear powers in the continent. That's why, if you ask my opinion, I'm not sure that in 20 years the right instrument will be the European Union as we know it. Because in order to overcome the unanimity rule, you need unanimity. How do you call it? Catch-22? And we cannot build our public good provision without UK. And as you put it delicately, it's not likely the UK is going to reverse Brexit anytime soon. So we might actually look at the situation where the European Union is not the guy, it's not our guy. We might need to come up with something else. But if we want diplomacy to matter, if we want Europe to matter, I think that's the way we have to pursue.
Luigi, I agree with pretty much everything you have said, so I can be quite short from my point of view. And that, I think, does strike the core that people can have slightly different political traditions, but come to very much the same analysis in this regard. But although we certainly do have many skills in Europe, which we can use, we have the technological and intellectual skills to innovate, but we are not good, any of us, at translating that into practice. And that is exactly down to regulations, down to tax regimes, to making that attractive to business and so on. So the wherewithal is there, but we are failing, lamentably, to actually capitalize on that, actually operationalize that, so that we're actually seeing the growth and the benefits for our populations. I think, again, we do have a long history of diplomatic engagement in the leading European countries, and that takes you so far. And I talked about the soft power issues, which are important, and we should not give up on those, but it's perfectly fair to say we live in a hard-headed world now. And in a hard-headed world, we've got to be able to back up those very useful and valuable and worthwhile things. In human terms, we've got to back them up with the hard stuff, which is the military power, it's the economic power, and it's the technology in what is, after all, an increasingly technological age. So I'm very much on the same wavelength as this. And I think the last point you're making, which was very, very interesting, so I hope that we can continue to explore as your party, I hope, develops and goes to further success with other like-minded parties in Europe. That's why I'm very keen that we don't, in the UK, sever our links with other European institutions, because it may well be that the current institutional frameworks aren't right for the future. That's not to denigrate their purpose, but things move on. And it may be that we either have to change the institutions itself, the EU, the Council of Europe, to reform them in some way. It may be that perhaps around the defence and other spheres we need to create some separate architecture that is allied to it. And the key thing is the shared values that we have around that. More we could do with NATO, I'm sure. And can we see the ways in which we can make that work together more effectively? So I think there's a really, really important point that you make, Luigi, and I very much to go along with it.
Thank you. I wanted to open to the floor. If there is someone who wants to ask something, here we go.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Alessandra, and thank you all for coming here. My name is Zach Wall. I'm a master's degree student at the LSE, and I think you started to answer this question, both of you here. I'm curious, do you see an opportunity for synergy and alignment between NATO's recent commitment to increase defense spending to a 5% target with the relative gap in innovation in the AI space. And I'm thinking of American companies like Palantir and Anduril, and perhaps European companies like Helsing and others that don't exist yet here. Thank you.
Very quickly, I hope so. Because there always been externalities between military spending and innovation, always. Maybe Ukraine after the war will be what Israel is in Middle East. It will be able, since it's developed a lot of military technology, it will be able to have an external effect on technology for everything else. In Germany, the plan that was they changed the constitution in Germany to allow the increase in defense spending, and which is something that no German would have ever thought, and they did that overnight. But in that plan, they specifically allowed for exactly what you were saying. So they are not increasing public spending just to buy bullets. We're increasing public spending to increase cybersecurity and to apply artificial intelligence technologies to new dual-use systems. So that's the intention. But again, you can do that only if you do it the right size of the market. If you do that, fragmenting the European market again, there will be a lot of wasted opportunities. So we always go back to the same point. If there are external effects from defense spending and innovation, which I'm sure they are, okay, Israel is there to prove it, you need to do that at the right market dimension, which is, again, means that countries should give up something. Because if everyone wants to support their own military, private military industries, there's nothing we can do. We need to integrate national military industries into European ones, which is not easy because we're talking about private sectors, right? But again, that's the only way we can go to.
Thanks. Yeah, again, I think that's right. I think there are real opportunities there, and I think within the European space there's clearly scope for integration and cooperation. Given that there are some states not within the EU, looking at it from the EU perspective, it may be that we use NATO as the umbrella by which we can do that. It's obviously ridiculous that there's not greater interoperability between the various units in NATO, both in terms of equipment, also in terms of military doctrine as well. There are different approaches to military doctrine too within NATO. I think we need to be doing much more to beef up NATO's centralised command and control structure, see how that links into the industrial base. And I think we ought to be looking too, again, at those other countries such as interoperability and perhaps potential for shared procurement with places like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, those others I was talking about again. Those people need to support us on the other side of the globe because they're fighting for the same values. So I think there's a lot that we could do there around that. The cyber security is really important. I mean, when I was on the National Security Strategy Committee, we issued a revised National Security Strategy for the United Kingdom. Cyber has been moved very much up to the very top of the risk register, along with actually pandemics, one of the other things that arose after Brexit, because we didn't have resilience for that. And there is a real concern about the level of resilience that we have for cyber security. That's at a national level, at a defence level, but it's also something that's really important now to individual firms and businesses, because there are bad actors, whether they're economically motivated or politically motivated, who attempt to use cyber to disrupt legitimate business in all of our countries. Cybersecurity is a really major issue as far as that's concerned. My own firm, who I'm the board of, we're an international firm of accountants. Cybersecurity is now one of our top issues on our risk register, in the same way as upgrading our AI is one of our top opportunities on our opportunity register.
Thank you for your interesting contributions. My name is Jason Sugarman. You've both lived through many decades of politics in Italy and England. You've known the individuals concerned like Draghi, Margaret Thatcher, Boris Johnson, these sorts of people. What do you think the world needs? We've got Trump, Meloni, we've got the far right coming up in France, Germany, and reform here, which is more of a pantomime than a party. But what do you think we need to be saying to our populations to take them away from these characters who it's all about them, it's all about my country, my interests, not about the issues that you so eloquently mentioned about the public good? France is apparently going to be dropped potentially from the European fighter proposal. And so we don't seem to agree on anything. And I haven't even mentioned Palestine, but we don't seem, as an international community, to agree on the important things that make things right. What lessons from history can we learn from those leaders that came up and changed things back to make things better, to improve our wealth creation, to improve our security? And you've lived and you've seen those leaders. What sort of leader do you think we need to see in Europe now?
Very dangerous question, because we can talk a couple of hours about it. Well, very shortly, I think that globalization and populism are changing the coordinates of the political spectrum. I mean, after all, obviously, you all know where right and left come from. They come from basically the Industrial Revolution. Actually, the French Revolution, which was the political interface of the Industrial Revolution. And where people were sitting in the National Assembly, right or left, that's how those terms were born. My take is that globalization is at least the same shock as Industrial Revolution was. It changed everything just as the Industrial Revolution did. So why should political categories resist to that change? Let me be clear. Today, John Kennedy and Ronald Reagan will be in the same party against Trump. Our party in Italy, the Liberal Democrat Party, that's the reason why we're born. Left and right in Italy, that don't mean anything. If you look at the economic programs of the right in Italy, it's like increased public spending, no market, no multinationals, print money, no competition, no liberalization. That's how they got 40%. And the Italian left is very different from what Italian left was 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. It's something else. It's Jeremy Corbyn. And I guess this holds for any other European countries. You were mentioning something about your party. I mean, I'm pretty sure that the same thing as I said now about Kennedy and Reagan could apply here against Farage or against Corbyn. So we need to change our political categories. And anytime, I mean, I've been saying that at least in the last 6 years. I published an article, Il Foglio, Italian newspaper. It was a very long and boring article. And everyone said, oh, so you're saying that there's going to be only one party. If there is no left and no right anymore, it means there is just one big party. No different political thoughts. No, I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying that the division between political categories doesn't run along the same lines it has been running in the last 200 years. Because we had globalization and we had populism. And bear in mind, there is no such a thing as left-wing populism and right-wing populism. It's only one damn populism. That's my, well, I could go on for a couple of hours, but I don't think that's the case. That's in a nutshell my opinion.
I think that again is really interesting, I suppose, and I'd agree with it, because in English we talk very much in terms of politics dividing left, right on sort of economics and class, sort of classic socio-economic sort of matrix, rather Marxist sort of analysis and thing. And I agree. I don't think that does hold good anymore. And you're seeing that when you segment the educational or socio-economic characteristics of the way people are voting. For different parties, we're seeing a fragmentation on both left and right in the UK. It'll be interesting to see how our electoral system, the first past the post, actually holds up under those circumstances, because we could get some very strange results at the general election if somebody gets 35% of the vote and is winning a huge majority. That raises legitimacy issues, I think, going forward. What I'd say, Jason, is the main problem is that we have become complacent about stability and moderation. Same as we became complacent about the American defense umbrella. We've become complacent about the success, actually, of liberal capitalism. That actually, it has generated far more wealth. It has raised far more people out of poverty than any other economic form. But we've rather taken that for granted. We've taken the fact that we have a pretty free and open set of societies in Europe and the Western democracies for granted. We've assumed that is the norm. Well, now, post-globalization, which was such a major shock, I entirely agree. Perhaps also post the pandemic, I don't think we should underestimate that in terms of the behavioural influence that had on many people, particularly younger people, and the disruption there. Now, there are people that are on the populist extremes who don't take that for granted and are, ironically, charismatic. What we need are charismatic centrists. So there's a job, Luigi. Charismatic centrists who make the case passionately for moderation. I actually want militant moderates. And maybe that's what we did have a bit after the Second World War. You might argue that Churchill and de Gaulle, Alcide de Gasperi and others were militant for moderate, sensible, collaborative causes. They were militant for that cause of international cooperation after the Second World War. We now need to be militant again, making that same case with the same determination and having leaders with that same flair. And maybe that's the thing that's lacking. There isn't the Ronald Reagan as the positive, that optimistic version of conservatism. I would have no trouble in hesitation in supporting Ronald Reagan were he still alive and were I an American. You wouldn't get me anywhere near Trump with a barge pole. Thank heavens I wasn't in Parliament when he came to visit. Well, fortunately, very cleverly, the palace organised it so that Parliament wasn't sitting when Trump arrived, so that spared us a few bits of embarrassment by and large. But I think that's what it is. We can't. We've taken it for granted for too long that common sense and rationality automatically prevail. I think history tells us that's not necessarily the case, and therefore we've got to get out there and use every rhetorical device, every device of human empathy that we can do, and at the same time win those rhetorical battles, but also come up with specifics which show actually it is that liberal set of values, that set of liberal progressive economics, which makes life better for the ordinary person, the ordinary man and woman, who at the moment feel fearful and insecure. So that's the big challenge for us in that centre to which I think both of us belong.
So my name is Luigi Sasso. So the way I look at Europe, for me, the only thing that's really in common today is the euro. Sorry, maybe a bit blunt in my way of looking at things. If I look at recently, Italy's been upgraded in terms of country rating. France is going down. So that makes me think that there are lots of differences across different countries. And we have seen with the sovereign debt crisis in Greece in 2008. So the question is for Europe is, before we start talking about integration of artificial intelligence, creating architecture, which is important, right? Because you cannot stop that, will accelerate. So should not Europe reflect on political integration, filling the gaps in terms of cultural differences? Because in terms of, if I was, I'm Italian, right? If I was Italian, why would I give up a little bit of my sovereign power in favor of another country? What makes me, what incentive do I have to do that? So I'm still struggling to understand the pros and cons of giving up a little bit. So that is, in essence, so the question I took, what would be the incentive for me, and should not Europe focus on, appreciating the difference, and how do I make more, because Europe is unique in the world, right, in terms of differences. How do I make Europe. Put this way, I don't know if that makes sense.
An European football league is going to do much more than many talks. An European newspaper is going to be much more than 1,000 talks. The fact that I can graduate in Netherlands and to be immediately recognized in Italy is going to be much more useful than 1,000 talks. We don't have these things. The problem: what's the incentives? Do you really think that any policy made at the national level for environment, weather regulation, or for defense, or research, do you think any of that at the national level actually matters? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Because the moment you are facing players such as US and China and soon India, nothing you do at national level in research, migration, defense, environment, industrial competitiveness, nothing matters at the national level. You just don't have enough power to do that. People don't realize that. So that's the job of politics, to make people realize that, because they are looking backward, So I've always been. We always run these things at the national level. Look how well we did in our country. If you look at the 206 countries in the world, if you compute the average rate of growth of GDP since 1995, you get a ranking from the fastest growing to the lowest growing. Anyone can guess which is the lowest growing country? Italy. That's why salaries don't increase in Italy. That's why welfare state is in danger. That's why health is in danger. So I believe that these are enough pros and cons just to, if the politicians are wise enough to be able to make people understand. And the second thing you were asking, well, the fact that the yields on government bonds are in line now, it's a huge revolution. I mean, only 10 years ago, we had the pigs, Portugal, Ireland or Italy, according to the country you were in, Greece, Spain, we had huge differences in the cost of debt. So in this situation, it's pure illusion to talk about Eurobond, to talk about enlarging the European budget, because countries are not willing to share the fiscal risk. Not only Germany versus Italy. I was with Prime Minister Renzi during the Greek crisis. And we, Italy, said we are not willing to pay for the generous Greek pensions. We were Germany back then. So when the cost of debt is so different, even within a monetary union, there is no way to advance in macroeconomic risk-sharing activities. Now something strange is happening. German cost of debt is increasing because they took out the debt brake in the constitution overnight. So German cost of debt is increasing. Italy cost of debt is decreasing because Italian government is doing the opposite of what he promised during the electoral campaign, luckily so. The opposite. Exactly the opposite. That's why we are doing so. So in the next electoral campaign, they will go back promising the opposite of the opposite. So Italian cost of debt is decreasing. France, we know the situation in France. So now the spreads are closing. So this is the right moment for fiscal risk sharing. Because you don't run the risk of countries saying, look, I don't want to pay for someone else. If the cost of debt is pretty much the same, these are the right macroeconomic conditions to take a step towards fiscal risk sharing. And again, we need the feeling of a European citizenship. And don't get me wrong, I'm not joking. Having a total unified university system, having European news, having European competition. I mean, Eurovision is doing more for European integration than, I'm not joking, because people need to belong, they need to belong to something. And we also need to do that, in my opinion. But again, the moment you are fragmenting countries, if you are fragmenting individual member states, like we are doing in Northern Italy and Southern Italy, there is no way you can develop a common citizenship between Italians and Finnish people. But again, this is what you need to do if we're gonna go that way.
Yeah, it's difficult for me as a member of an outside state, if you like, as a bystander, to say too much, apart from regretting it again. But I think I'll just say this: we do have to remember the emotional side of decision making as well. The incentives work for rational decision making, which is what most of us in this room would seek to do. I don't think the decision that the UK made in relation to the referendum was based on rationality, but it was based upon very significant sentiment. So we have to win that battle as well, and that's the point. So that's back to my point about a form of rhetoric, a form of argument that is persuasive, both in emotional terms, because sovereignty was an emotive thing in the UK rather than a matter of reality. But we need to do that, and also deliver the tangible benefits that remove the legitimate source of grievance that the manipulators of the populist right or left then prey upon. And that's a common cause that all of us have got to try and sign up to.
Thank you very much. I think there is last question. Oh, perfect, because we really have a couple of minutes and then we are off to go.
Good evening, Sarah Marani from Reuters News Agency. Just following on from that point, I can see two gentlemen from two different cultures, two different countries, two different generations, if you permit me. And Mr. Marattin, you are fully Italian, as am I, but I almost get the feeling that you want to deny your Italianness, whereas this gentleman in the audience is very much echoing my question, is that you want us to sort of renounce our Italianship. Now, when Britain faced the Brexit vote, the question of sovereignty was key. When people thought they were losing their sovereignty, they voted Brexit. If you're asking countries to renounce their sovereignty, you're going to lose them all, don't you think? So isn't the argument rather that you're approaching it through globalization and the positive forces within that, it's going to go against you and you're barking up the wrong tree? You need more of a Europe with a small e, which I think Sir Robert was alluding to when he's talking about our Commonwealth history, which is a very different point of view. So we all need to approach it from our own histories and our own culture. And when you say, fiscal responsibility to be shared between the Italians and the Finns, it's never going to happen. It's just never going to happen because Italians are emotionally different to the Finns, to the British. So if you know that's never going to happen, why is that still your strategy?
Well, it happened with the Next Generation EU. 750 billion of common debt. Then the way we are spending it is another issue. But it happened.
No, but
6 months.
There's no you're wanting agreement on politics, economics, everything. I mean, you can just see from the Palestinian recognition points, everyone's doing their own thing. And that's never going to change in terms of people's emotions. Macron doing his thing, Starmer doing his thing, Meloni not doing it, for example. So if you want a united Europe, it's got to be either united in everything, or you have to pick and choose. That's
Well,
what
the question is, obviously, I'm not asking to renounce Italian sovereignty, and that's it. The question is in exchange for what? So the whole thing is how you specify in exchange of what. If you stop the sentence halfway, I ask you to renounce your being Italian, I ask you to renounce national sovereignty. But in order to build a shared sovereignty, I said, because we are in a LSE. If I had to talk in an Italian audience at the bar, I'm saying we need to give up something in order to build something else, trying to specify as much as I can what this something else is. I don't. If you want to enlarge the EU budget, either you increase taxation with no limits, or you need to give up some national spending. So I need to persuade people that the national spending on environment can be more useful if given to the European budget, and this will be more effective for Italian people. This is not an easy task, but this is the only way I can do. So the first part of the sentence, it sounds very bad. The second part of the sentence, that's all about the second part of the sentence. In exchange of what? And I wouldn't be very worried that we have different opinion about Palestine's, because foreign policy, European foreign policy simply doesn't exist. So that's why member states they feel entitled to have different opinions. The moment we build an EU foreign policy, if we build the adequate governance architecture, we will be able to have a unified, maybe. I mean, I don't think that in UK you have the same position about Palestine. So, I mean, it's not about having everyone thinking the same things. It's about building an adequate institutional architecture for Europe, which is not easy, but I mean, I don't see any other alternatives. That's the problem. I mean, I realize how hard it is, but the moment I ask myself, what's the alternative? I don't see anything better than trying to do that.
I don't think the UK are in a position to offer too much advice on the topic at the moment, so I just wish you well with it, Luigi. That's the best I can say.
Thank you very much for this wonderful talk. We learned a great deal, and we know there are so many challenges ahead, but we hope that with a good leadership and politicians, we can try to navigate these very rough seas ahead. Thank you so very much for Sir Neil and Mr. Dr. Marattini. We can give a round of applause and see you next time in London. Thank you.